The burning of the Library of Alexandria is often seen as history's greatest tragedy, a symbol of lost knowledge and the fragility of civilization. We imagine scrolls of wisdom, lost plays, and scientific breakthroughs turned to ash. But was it really a single, catastrophic fire? Or is the truth more complex? The library's demise is a tangled story of politics, religion, and neglect, not just a dramatic blaze. To uncover what really happened, we must sift through myth, propaganda, and centuries of blame. This is not just a story of loss, but a detective tale set in the ruins of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria was the world's first universal library, a hub for scholars and a beacon of learning. Its destruction is shrouded in mystery. Ancient sources are vague, contradictory, and often biased. Was it Caesar's fire, religious conflict, or the Arab conquest that doomed it? Or did the library simply fade away, undone by neglect and shifting priorities? The evidence suggests a slow decline, not a single moment of destruction. The real tragedy may be that knowledge is most often lost not in flames but through indifference. The greatest threat to wisdom is forgetting to care for it. The library's story begins with Alexander the Great's vision of a world united by knowledge. After his death, Ptolemy I made Alexandria his capital and set out to create a center of learning to rival Athens. Inspired by Aristotle's Lyceum, he founded the Musion, a temple to the Muses, with a library at its heart. The Ptolemies poured resources into collecting every text they could find, making the library a symbol of power and intellect. Scholars from across the world were drawn to this intellectual paradise, supported by royal patronage. Their only job to study, think, and expand human understanding. The library became a living organism, attracting the brightest minds of the ancient world. The library's collection was vast, hundreds of thousands of scrolls from epic poetry to scientific treatises. The Ptolemies aggressively acquired texts, even copying books from ships that docked in Alexandria. Organization was key. Callimachus created the Panakes, the world's first library catalog guiding scholars through the collection. Preserving fragile papyrus was a monumental task, requiring dedicated scribes and restorers. The library's staff were the silent guardians of knowledge, ensuring ancient voices endured. For centuries, this system made Alexandria the intellectual heart of the world. The library was more than a building, it was a testament to humanity's drive to understand. The library's true legacy lies in its people, the scholars who transformed the world. Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy. Euclid wrote Elements, the foundation of geometry, for 2 millennia. Hero of Alexandria invented early machines. Aristarchus proposed a sun-centered solar system. Medical pioneers like Theophilus advanced anatomy and physiology. The library fostered translation, research, and debate, pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Though much is lost, the spirit of inquiry born in Alexandria still shapes our world. It is crucial to understand that the library and the Musion were two parts of a single whole. The Musion was the broader research institution, while the library was its heart, providing the resources for study. The complex was not just a quiet place for solitary reading, it was a bustling campus that likely included lecture halls, dissection rooms for medical students, an observatory for astronomers, and even a small zoo for studying exotic animals. It had dining halls where scholars could eat together and debate their ideas late into the night. It was a complete ecosystem designed to foster intellectual collaboration and discovery. The model is familiar to us today. It was the world's first ever university campus. The influence of this institution spread far beyond the city of Alexandria. It set the standard for scholarship and learning throughout the Hellenistic world. The critical and systematic methods developed by its scholars shaped the way people approached literature, history, and science. They invented literary criticism, painstakingly comparing different versions of classic texts like the Iliad and the Odyssey to create definitive, standardized editions. This work of editing and preservation is one of the library's most important legacies. Without the efforts of the Alexandrian scholars, many of the classical texts we cherish today might never have survived the passage of time in a recognizable form. However, this ivory tower of learning did not exist in a vacuum. It was situated in the heart of a vibrant, chaotic, and often violent city. Alexandria was a melting pot of cultures. Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, and people from all over the Mediterranean lived side by side. This diversity was a source of great creativity, but it was also a source of constant tension. The scholars of the Musion were funded by the ruling Ptolemaic dynasty, and their fates were tied to the political fortunes of their patrons. When the dynasty was strong and stable, the library flourished, but when political turmoil erupted, the scholars and their institution were vulnerable. This reliance on royal patronage was both the library's greatest strength and its fatal weakness. The institution was not a public library in the modern sense. It was an instrument of state power, a symbol of royal prestige. Its primary purpose was to serve the needs of the scholars and the ambitions of the king, not the general public. While a smaller daughter library was later established at the Temple of Serapis, the Great Museum remained an elite and somewhat isolated institution. This meant that when the political winds changed and new rulers came to power with different priorities, the library found itself in a precarious position, its future far from certain. The seeds of its decline were sown in the very soil of its creation. The golden age of the library could not last forever. Alexandria was no ordinary city, a metropolis where cultures collided. Its magnificent harbor welcomed ships from across the Mediterranean. This vibrant hub was also a city of deep divisions, a Greek city planted in Egyptian soil. This cultural fusion created tension that could erupt into violence. Mob violence was a common feature of city life. The city was slowly becoming a threat to the library's very survival. The library's decline is linked to the Ptolemaic dynasty. The early Ptolemies invested in Alexandria's intellectual life, building the library into a world-renowned institution. Later rulers faced family rivalries and civil wars, draining the treasury and diverting attention from the library. Funding became uncertain, and the library suffered from neglect and a lack of resources. Cleopatra sought to restore her dynasty, forming alliances with Rome. This brought Roman military power to Alexandria, placing the city and the library at the center of a war. Beyond the political turmoil, Alexandria was also a city boiling with religious fervor. The traditional pantheon of Greek and Egyptian gods had long coexisted, sometimes blending into new hybrid deities like Serapis. The Temple of Serapis, or the Serapeum, was a magnificent structure that became one of the most important religious centers in the city. It was so grand that it was said to have housed a daughter library, a secondary collection of scrolls meant for a wider audience than the elite scholars of the Mushan. This placed a significant portion of Alexandria's knowledge directly within a religious space, intertwining the fate of the books with the fate of the pagan faith. This religious landscape was dramatically altered by the arrival of a new and powerful belief system, Christianity. By the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the Christian community in Alexandria had grown from a small persecuted sect into a major force in the city. The Christians were fervent, organized, and deeply intolerant of the pagan beliefs they sought to replace. They saw the old gods as demons and the magnificent temples as dens of iniquity. This set the stage for a bitter and often violent conflict. The streets that had once seen riots between Greeks and Jews now became the battleground for a war between Christians and pagans for the soul of the city. The climax of this struggle came in the year 391 AD. By this time, Christianity had become the official state religion of the Roman Empire. Theophilus, the fiercely anti-pagan bishop of Alexandria, received permission from the emperor to destroy the city's pagan temples. His primary target was the grandest of them all, the Serapeum. A Christian mob, led by Theophilus himself, stormed the temple complex. They smashed the cult statues, defaced the sacred images, and set the buildings ablaze. Ancient accounts describe a scene of total destruction as centuries of religious heritage were wiped out in a frenzy of iconoclastic rage. The temple that had stood as a symbol of pagan Alexandria was utterly demolished. The key question for our investigation is what happened to the books. If the Serapeum did indeed house the daughter library, as many sources suggest, its collection would have been in grave danger during this attack. While no ancient source explicitly states that the scrolls were deliberately burned by the Christian mob, it is difficult to imagine them surviving such a violent sacking. The scrolls may have been seen as objects of pagan wisdom and therefore deserving of destruction. Or perhaps more likely they were simply lost in the chaos, destroyed alongside the rest of the temple's contents. The destruction of the Serapeum represents another major blow, a potential second fire that devastated a significant part of Alexandria's intellectual treasures. The story of Alexandria's turmoil cannot be told without acknowledging the growing power that loomed over the entire Mediterranean Rome. As the Ptolemaic dynasty weakened, Rome's influence in Egypt grew stronger. Roman politicians saw Egypt, with its immense grain wealth and strategic location, as crucial. The Ptolemies' squabbles provided the perfect excuse for Roman intervention. By the 1st century BC, Egyptian rulers were dependent on Roman support. The independence that had allowed the library to flourish was slipping away. This culminated in the arrival of Julius Caesar in 48 BC. It was during the Alexandrian War that the first and most famous fire occurred. Some accounts claim that these flames reached the library, destroying a vast number of scrolls. The shadow of Rome would hang over Alexandria for centuries to come. While it continued to exist under Roman rule, it was a shadow of its former self. The Roman shadow marked the beginning of a long, slow twilight. Our investigation brings us to a famous suspect in the library's destruction, Gaius Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, the Roman general arrived in Alexandria during a crisis, fresh from victory over Pompey. Caesar intervened in the Egyptian civil war, backing Cleopatra's claim to the throne. Trapped in Alexandria, Caesar faced a desperate struggle. The library found itself on the front lines. The Library of Alexandria was caught in the crossfire. Caesar's measures had fiery consequences, placing his name at the center of this historical mystery. With the Egyptian fleet a threat, Caesar made a ruthless decision. He needed to neutralize the enemy ships. He ordered his soldiers to set the Egyptian ships ablaze. The plan worked, turning the harbor into fiery destruction. Fire is difficult to control, especially in a crowded city. A strong breeze fanned the flames towards the shore. The fire leaped to the docks and warehouses. Ancient authors say this fire spread disastrously. Seneca states that 40,000 scrolls were burned. It was a catastrophic accident, but Caesar makes no mention of the library burning. This is a significant omission. After the fire, we are left with a confusing and contradictory historical record. Seneca mentions 40,000 scrolls, but what if the fire didn't destroy the main library at all? Perhaps it was a collection of scrolls stored in warehouses near the docks. The main institution was likely set further back from the immediate waterfront. It was a significant loss of books, but not the destruction of the library itself. The geographer Strabo, who worked in Alexandria after the fire, mentions the Museion as a key feature of the city. He makes no mention of it having been recently destroyed. When you really weigh the evidence, it kinda points us toward a revised conclusion. The fire of 48 BC wasn't actually the end of the Library of Alexandria, but, it was definitely a serious and painful wound. A significant number of scrolls, likely tens of thousands, were almost certainly lost in the flames that consumed those waterfront warehouses. This was a catastrophic loss of knowledge, representing a substantial portion of the library's collection, or maybe its new acquisitions. The story of the fire became this, convenient and dramatic explanation for the library's eventual demise. A single event that was just easier to understand than the slow, complex process of decline that was already underway. Still, the incident marked a crucial turning point in the library's history. It showed, in the most brutal way possible, the institution's vulnerability. Its fate was no longer in the hands of scholarly kings who saw it as their crowning glory. Instead, its survival now depended on the whims of foreign generals and the shifting tides of Roman politics. After Caesar, Cleopatra reportedly tried to replenish the collection. There's a story that her Roman lover Mark Antony gifted her 200,000 scrolls from the Library of Pergamum, a rival institution in Asia Minor, to make up for the losses. While this story might just be propaganda, it really shows that the idea of the library's collection being depleted was present even in the ancient world. The Roman takeover of Egypt in 30 BC after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra solidified this new reality. Alexandria became a provincial capital, and the Museion lost its primary patron. While Roman emperors would continue to fund it, at least to some degree, it never regained the prestige or the lavish support it had enjoyed under the early Ptolemies. The intellectual center of the world was shifting decisively toward Rome. The fire started by Caesar's men was a physical manifestation of this power shift. It was the first major blow delivered by the new masters of the Mediterranean, a sign that the golden age of Alexandria was, truly over. So we really have to see Julius Caesar not as the man who single-handedly destroyed the library, but as the agent of a historical process that sealed its fate. His fire was the first flame in a long and slow burn. It inflicted a deep wound from which the institution may never have fully recovered. It sped up a decline that had already begun, thanks to the internal decay of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The library would survive for several more centuries, but it would be a shadow of its former self, living under the Roman shadow and vulnerable to the new religious and political tempests gathering on the horizon. The fatal blow, though, was yet to come. The library wasn't renewed after Caesar's fire and the Roman conquest. It was an era of slow decline. The Museum existed but was a ghost of its former self. Alexandria was valued for its grain, not its genius. Royal patronage vanished, replaced by a distant bureaucracy. Funding for scholars and scrolls ran dry, leading to a profound effect. The library became a living museum, a relic. The political climate played a role. Emperors were suspicious of intellectuals. Caracalla suppressed the Mucian, expelling scholars. Scholarship changed, focusing on preserving old works. The library became an archive, losing its creative spark. While the library was slowly fading, a new and incredibly powerful force was rapidly rising within Alexandria. This force was Christianity. It arrived in the city as a small, often persecuted Jewish sect, but over the course of 3 centuries, it grew into a formidable and highly organized movement. The Christian message found fertile ground among the city's diverse and often disenfranchised populations. By the 4th century AD, the Christian community in Alexandria was not just large, it was a major power player in the city's volatile politics. It had its own charismatic leaders, its own fierce internal debates, and a deep, unwavering conviction that it held the one true path to salvation, a truth that demanded the eradication of all others. This new faith had a fundamentally different relationship with the knowledge of the past. For the pagan scholars of the early library, all knowledge was a worthy pursuit, a way to understand the cosmos and human experience. But for many early Christians, this classical learning was suspect. The great works of Greek philosophy, science, and literature were products of a pagan world, tainted by idolatry and false gods. At best, they were a distraction from the study of Scripture. At worst, they were dangerous heresies that could lead souls astray. This created a deep ideological rift. The classical ideal of open-ended inquiry was being challenged by a worldview centered on divine revelation and absolute faith. And this clash of worldviews wasn't just academic, it was fought in the streets. Alexandria became a battleground between the old pagan elites and the rising Christian populace. The city's long history of mob violence found a new and fervent expression in religious conflict. Christian mobs, often encouraged by their fiery bishops, targeted the symbols of the old religion, the temples, the statues, and the priests. For them, these weren't cultural treasures to be preserved, they were abominations to be destroyed. The rich intellectual heritage of the Greeks and Egyptians, once the city's greatest pride, was now rebranded by its most zealous new inhabitants as a demonic legacy that needed to be cleansed from the world. The turning point came when Christianity gained the ultimate victory, the support of the state. When the Roman emperors converted to Christianity, the entire power structure of the empire shifted. What was once a persecuted faith became the official religion, armed with imperial authority. This gave figures like the Bishop of Alexandria immense power. They could now use the force of law and the sanction of the emperor to pursue their campaign against paganism. The old gods were outlawed, their temples ordered closed or demolished. And this set the stage for a final, violent confrontation that would target not just a building, but the very heart of pagan religious and intellectual life in Alexandria. In 391 AD, a second devastating fire occurred. This time the focus was on the Serapeum, a daughter library to the Library of the Museum and a temple complex. Bishop Theophilus, with an edict from Emperor Theodosius I, led a mob to destroy pagan temples. The Serapeum was stormed, its statues smashed and its walls torn down. The scrolls were likely destroyed, a deliberate act of cultural annihilation. This event marked the spiritual death of classical Alexandria, a catastrophic loss of knowledge. The picture that emerges is not of a single event, but of a long, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts. The library did not die in one great cinematic blaze. It was bled dry over centuries by waning patronage, Roman conquest, and the rise of Christianity. The destruction of the Serapeum was perhaps the most brutal blow. By the 5th century, the Museum seems to have simply faded. The library was not murdered at a single stroke, it died a slow, lingering death. So what really happened to the great Library of Alexandria? The popular story of a single, cataclysmic fire is a myth. The image of a lone villain setting a match to the tinderbox of ancient wisdom is a simplification. It's an invention created to provide a simple answer. The truth is a slow process of decline that spanned centuries. We are drawn to the story of a great fire because it is cinematic. This narrative transforms the library's end into a cautionary tale. To truly understand what happened, we must let go of this idea of a single moment of destruction. Instead, we need to think of the library as a living organism. Political instability and economic hardship began to starve the institution. The library was already on a terminal decline. Let us now deliver the verdict on our primary suspects. First, Julius Caesar, not guilty. Next, Bishop Theophilus, guilty of destroying the Serapeum and likely its library. Finally, Caliph Omar, also not guilty. The destruction of the library was a crime with multiple accomplices acting over a long period. The blame is a collective failure. The true culprit of the library's disappearance is simple neglect. The greatest threat to knowledge is not always the fire of the fanatic, but the cold indifference of those who no longer value it. The Library of Alexandria required immense and continuous investment to sustain. When that passion faded and the political will to fund it disappeared, the library's doom was sealed. These small acts of neglect, multiplied over decades and centuries, are far more destructive than a single fire. The library was slowly being erased by apathy. The library's fate teaches us that knowledge is not a permanent monument of stone, but a delicate ecosystem that requires constant cultivation. When those things vanish, knowledge does not just disappear, it turns to dust. The library was not so much destroyed as it was allowed to die. We must abandon the model of a single catastrophic loss and adopt a new one: gradual dissipation. Instead of a great library burning, imagine a vast lake slowly evaporating. The fire was like a bucket being scooped out. The destruction was like a dam breaking. Purges were like droughts. But evaporation, neglect, decay, shrank the lake day by day. This explains why the library simply fades away. Its collection scattered over time. Some scrolls burned, others decayed. Some moved to other cities or were sold. By the 5th century, no great library remained. The reservoir of knowledge broke apart. This understanding is more profound. Preservation is an active struggle. Alexandria is a warning. Decay is relentless. Without constant effort, knowledge slips away. The tragedy is losing the will to save. Our journey through history ends. We search for the truth about the Library of Alexandria. The conclusion: the world's greatest library wasn't murdered in a single act of violence. It died a slow death. The library's demise teaches us a lesson about knowledge itself. Alexandria shows us that knowledge is fragile, perishable, and requires constant preservation. We live in a digital Alexandria, where the world's knowledge is at our fingertips, facing similar threats. The library's story is a warning that the existence of knowledge doesn't guarantee its survival, a reminder of what happens when we fail to be guardians of the past and custodians of the future. In the end, perhaps the most important thing to remember is that the Library of Alexandria did not truly burn. The idea of the library, its spirit, has proven to be far more resilient than its physical scrolls. The dream of a universal repository of knowledge, a place for critical inquiry and scholarly collaboration, survived the fall of Alexandria. That idea was carried forward, copied and preserved just like the most precious of texts. It re-emerged in the great libraries of Constantinople and Baghdad. It found a home in the monasteries of medieval Europe, where monks painstakingly copied ancient manuscripts, saving them from oblivion. It was reborn in the universities of the Renaissance and illuminated by the thinkers of the Enlightenment. The myth of the Great Fire, while historically inaccurate, has served a vital purpose. It has become a powerful symbol, a cultural touchstone that reminds us of the value of what we might lose. Every time a book is banned, every time a historical archive is threatened, every time education is defunded, the ghost of Alexandria is invoked. The story serves as a potent rallying cry for the defense of knowledge against the forces of ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. In this way, the legend of the library's destruction has done more to preserve the ideal of the library than any single ancient building ever could. It is a story that has armed generations of defenders of learning. Our investigation into this ancient mystery reveals a final, crucial truth. History is not a simple narrative with clear villains and heroes. It is a messy, complex, and often contradictory story. By questioning the popular myth of the library's burning, we are engaging in the very activity that the Library of Alexandria itself championed: critical inquiry. We are weighing evidence, analyzing sources, and challenging received wisdom. The scholars of the Museum would have approved. The greatest tribute we can pay to the memory of the library is not to mourn a fire that never happened in the way we imagine, but to continue its work of questioning, exploring, and seeking a deeper understanding of our world. So, the next time you hear the story of how the Library of Alexandria burned, you will know the truth. You will know that the real story is one of slow decay and scattered loss, but you will also know that its spirit was never truly extinguished. It lives on in every library, every school, every laboratory, and in every person who believes in the power of reason and the importance of preserving our shared human story. The great library is gone, its scrolls have turned to dust, but the fire it ignited in the minds of humanity continues to burn brightly to this day, a flame that has been passed from one generation to the next.